Welcome, everyone. We appreciate you making the trip, for many of you, here to Hamilton to our workshop on surviving Ontario's new second parent symposium. My name is Father Geoffrey Korz. I'm from this parish and the General Secretary of our local Orthodox Association. We have had many requests over many months to have a symposium like this, and we thought the best thing to bring together than our dear friend in Toronto, brother there, so that they could prepare. Thank you very much. We can prepare the remote connection. So hello to those of you in Toronto. Please pray for us and wave to the camera. We can't see you, but it's nice to have you with us too. I invite everyone to stand, and we'll just say a short prayer to begin, and then I'll welcome our guests. Let us pray to the Lord. Lord of mercy, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, thou hast said with thy most holy lips, without me you could do nothing. My Lord and my God, in faith I embrace thy words with my heart, with my soul, bow before thy goodness. Help us sinners, do in union with thee the work which we are about to begin. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, now and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen. Please be seated. For many of you who are parents or people who watch the media over the last little while, the concern about the new Ontario sex ed program is something that's come up in the last. Unfortunately, of some of the other communities. And then our second speaker will talk about what's happening politically, or sometimes it's not happening politically across the province, and especially in the GTA. And then I will present this three-step action plan that we are recommending to people for September for those who are remaining in the public and Catholic school systems, both of which will be affected by Ontario's new sex ed plan. After our break, we'll have a presentation on homeschooling myths and facts and where to begin successful homeschooling. Because, frankly, there are several of us who believe you can try to survive in the public school system in Ontario. You can try to survive in the Catholic school system. I've worked in both, but you're banging your head against the wall, and you may want to seriously consider the option of homeschool, because it's going to deliver a lot more of what you're looking for education for your kids. So I'd like to welcome our first guest, Dr. Steve Tourloukis. Steve is a dentist in, not exactly Hamilton, just outside Hamilton, and lives here in town. He is a father of 2 children and a member of one of our local Greek Orthodox parishes. And Steve had the temerity some years ago to go to his school and ask his school to kindly exclude his kids from the sex ed curriculum as it currently exists. He was given lots of assurances, and these assurances turned out to be false. And after a long wrangle with the school, the officials at the school board officials, wranglings which lasted, I think, about 2 years, Steve had the courage to launch a lawsuit against the Hamilton District School Board. It was at that point that I actually got to meet Steve. So, I mean, if this hadn't happened, we would be strangers. So, thank God for these opportunities we do get to meet each other. But a big smile, I have to say, crossed my face face when I found out one of my faith brothers in Christ was the one who launched this lawsuit. It's a very courageous thing to do, and it's very nice to see that coming from our community. This is not a short story. Steve has been kind enough to put his notes into as short a form as possible, because there's a lot to tell. But after Steve speaks, we'll have 10 minutes for questions, and hopefully you'll also have a chance to speak during the roundtable sessions at the end. Please welcome Dr. Steve Tourloukis.
Thank you, Father Geoffrey. Like Father Geoffrey said, my name is Steve Tourloukis. I'm a parent with 2 children who attend the public school board here in Hamilton. Many of you may be familiar with my legal challenge, which involves trying to get the school board to accommodate my family's Orthodox beliefs. My goal today is to help you get 2 important things from your local school boards. Number 1, advance notice when your children will be exposed to and number 2, an opt-out for your kids when the school wants to indoctrinate them. Ontario's education minister has publicly proclaimed that parents have the right to withdraw their kids from any content they don't want their child to receive. This proclamation was made repeatedly in the days after the new sex ed curriculum was released, and the minister went out of her way to say that the right to opt out would not be limited to sex education. The minister even said that the right to opt out is enshrined in the Education Act. Well, I am in complete agreement with the Education Minister. The Education Act does give a parent the right to withdraw their children from objectionable lessons. Just don't be fooled into thinking that school boards follow the law. Unfortunately, I have been in court for almost 3 years trying to get an opt-out for my kids. My local school board is arguing that my kids have no legal rights to opt out, even though the Education Minister has said that the right to opt out is guaranteed by the Education Act. My school board is so committed to preventing opt-outs that they even trained teachers on how to reject a parent who asked for one. Teachers were actually trained to deny me my legal rights. They were literally given scripts to memorize when confronted by parents like me. This is what we're up against, and my hope is to equip you to deal with this. So how do you get an opt-out from your school? Well, the first thing to do is to identify what materials conflict with your Orthodox faith. You cannot expect the school to give you advance notice and opt-outs if you don't describe for the schools what materials might conflict with your faith. The description of what conflicts with your faith should possess 3 characteristics. It should be in writing. If it's not in writing, it never happens. It should be very specific and very narrow. If your description is vague and or broad, they will not give you opt-outs. And you will not succeed if you object to your children being exposed to factual information. If you object to your children being exposed to factual information, you will fail. The Supreme Court of Canada has already decided this. The courts have taken the position that schools exist to teach the facts, even if the facts relate to topics that make parents uncomfortable. Consider the issue of homosexuality. You will not get an opt-out if you object to your children learning that homosexuality exists. But you might get an opt-out if you object to them teaching your kid that homosexuality is normal or healthy. This type of instruction is indoctrination, and many people would argue that it's illegal in the first place. Once you have identified what materials you object to, you have to request the next step is to request the opt-outs. The question is, how do you go about requesting an opt-out? How you make your request for an opt-out is extremely important. There's a right way to request opt-outs, and there is a wrong way to request opt-outs. The least effective method to obtain an opt-out is to say that you don't want your kids in the class simply because you don't like what's being taught. This approach is doomed to fail. Do you really think that Kathleen Wynne cares what you want for your kids? They know you don't want your kids learning this stuff. That's why they have taken it upon themselves to teach this stuff in the first place. Do not expect them to give you an opt-out merely because you don't like what they're teaching. What about just telling the school that the Education Act requires an opt-out? Well, in a rational world, school boards would know and follow the law with respect to advance notice and opt-outs. But I am proof that they don't. That doesn't mean you can't mention the Education Act when you try to get an opt-out. In fact, you should mention that you're only asking them to follow the law. Mentioning this might have a subtle intimidating effect on the teachers and might therefore be beneficial.
However, given the agenda of some educators, the Education Act should only be one component of your request for an opt-out. So then, what is the best way to request an opt-out? What will give you the greatest chance of receiving an opt-out in advance notice? The fact of the matter is that it is a sin to allow your children to participate in these types of activities, like GSA assemblies. Abstaining from this type of instruction is in fact a requirement of our Orthodox faith. Because abstaining from false teachings is a religious practice that is a requirement of our faith, you can try getting an opt-out by requesting a religious accommodation. This is analogous to Muslims and Jehovah's Witnesses opting out whenever the class is doing even highly secularized activities relating to Easter and Christmas. School boards have been allowing this for decades. It is important to realize that there is nothing novel about having kids leave the class for religious reasons. Asking for an opt-out as part of a religious accommodation completely changes the nature of your request. It is an established principle of constitutional law that school boards have a legal duty to accommodate religious practices. This legal duty is a very strict requirement that is difficult for school to ignore. It puts the onus on the school boards to demonstrate why they cannot accommodate your family. Ignoring their legal responsibilities under the Education Act is much easier than ignoring their legal duty to accommodate religious practices. When you request an opt-out as part of a religious accommodation, you should make two things very clear to them. You need to explicitly say to them that they would be forcing your child to sin by not letting them opt out. And two, you need to explicitly say to them that abstaining from this type of instruction is a requirement of your faith. After you have communicated these two things to them, ask them, do you believe that I'm being sincere when I say that my religion requires my children to abstain from these activities? If you can somehow document their answer to this question, it could be very helpful later on. In order to help them understand your position, you should share some verses from the Bible that support your request. There are many Bible verses that instruct us to avoid false teachings. I suggest warming them up by first sharing Matthew 18:6, which states, if anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Well, that will certainly give them something to think about. It should be understood that requesting an opt-out as a religious accommodation doesn't guarantee anything. It does, however, create a potential nightmare for school administrators and will, at the very least, put you in a position to expose their hypocrisy and their anti-Christian bias. As an aside, I would not suggest asking for a religious accommodation unless you sincerely believe that your faith requires your children to abstain. Our holy scriptures are not to be used as a prop. To whom should you take your request? I would start with the classroom teacher. There are still many teachers who share our values. I know many teachers who do not feel comfortable indoctrinating your children. Teachers hate having to deal with angry parents, and many of them will accommodate you simply to avoid conflict. Even if the teacher does agree to accommodate you, it is important to discuss the situation with the principal. I say this because your child might be indoctrinated outside of the classroom, in a school-wide GSA assembly, for example. Whenever you meet with a board employee, after the meeting, send them a letter asking them to confirm in writing what was just discussed. What I would recommend is for you to summarize the discussion for them and ask them if they concur with your version of the meeting. In the letter, advise them that their confirmation will facilitate any meetings with their superiors. So what do you do if they deny your request for a religious accommodation? If they deny your request for religious accommodation, I would encourage you not to give up. You should demand an explanation from them. You should be relentless. The administrators that you deal with will usually have a very poor understanding of the issues involved. They will likely give you a prepackaged explanation filled with meaningless buzzwords in the hopes that you will just go away. Challenge every ridiculous thing that they say to you. My goal in the time that remains is to help you respond to the prepackaged excuses that they will feed you. Prepackaged excuse number one. They will say to you, we cannot let your kids opt out because it would be a violation of our policies. For example, their homophobia policy. And these are my suggested responses or strategies. Under no circumstances should you accept the notion that opting out would be a violation of any policy. This is an excuse and a lie that is designed to put you on the defensive. The mere absence of your child from the classroom does not violate any board or provincial policies. How does an empty chair in the classroom violate any policy? Ask them why their preoccupation with policies is so selective. What about their religious accommodation policy? Remind them of their legal duty to accommodate. The fact that they should deny religious accommodation because of a mythical policy conflict is a deception that completely ignores the legal definition of religious accommodation. Religious accommodation involves altering an existing policy when a person's religious beliefs conflict with the existing policy. What can we learn from this definition? When your religious beliefs conflict with a policy, this is what actually triggers the duty to accommodate. In other words, a policy conflict, even if it did exist, compels them to make an exception to the policy. This is why Sikhs are allowed to wear their ceremonial knives. A Sikh is required by their religion to carry a knife. School boards have policies against carrying knives, which is why the school boards were compelled to change their policies to allow Sikhs to carry their knives. In fact, you should ask them why Sikhs are allowed to carry daggers if the existence of a policy justifies the denial of religious accommodation. A conflict between a religious practice and a policy legally obliges them to look for ways to alter the policy. A mythical policy conflict is actually a terrible excuse to deny religious accommodation. The potency of your response will be greatly enhanced if you accuse them of discrimination for not accommodating you. And that's really what they're doing, by the way. So prepackaged excuse number 2 is what they tell you when excuse number 1 doesn't work. So what they will tell you is that we can't let your kids opt out because it would make the classroom less safe, welcoming, and inclusive. They say that all the time. Or they might say it differently. They might say, we can't let your kids out because it would hurt the feelings of a gay classmate or a classmate with a gay family member. Therefore, allowing your kids to opt out would amount to discrimination against the children with hurt feelings. And so what can you say in response to that? Well, again, you must completely reject the idea that the absence of your child will make your classroom less safe, welcoming, and inclusive. This is, again, a ploy to put you on the defensive. The absence of your child, an empty chair, will not make the class less safe. Another thing to tell them, and this is very important, is that information about your requested accommodation is confidential under provincial privacy legislation. Your child's absence from the class is nobody's business. The law is very clear about this. The other children in the class have no right to know why your child isn't in class. The Supreme Court of Canada has already decided that the feelings of classmates cannot justify the denial of religious accommodation. This happened with the Kirpan, the Sikh decision. People were saying at the time that my kids are going to feel unsafe if these kids are allowed to wear their Kirpans. And the Supreme Court decided, your kids' feelings are not important. The feelings of other people cannot be used to deny religious accommodation. If your religious beliefs don't offend somebody, you probably don't believe in anything at all. Freedom of religion is protected in the Charter precisely because religious beliefs are frequently offensive to others. If religious accommodations can be denied because of somebody's hurt feelings, then there would be no such thing as religious accommodations. Many people are offended by Muslims leaving the class to pray, but it's still allowed. Many more people are offended by the accommodations offered at Valley Park Middle School. This is the Toronto school that converts its cafeteria into a mosque on Fridays. Girls must sit behind the boys, and girls who are on their period have to pray at the very back of the cafeteria. There was a great deal of public outrage when the story about Valley Park hit the news. This religious accommodation hurt many people's feelings. What was the response of the Toronto board? They said that the way that Muslims choose to pray is none of anybody's business. Well, why can't they adopt this reason to your opt-out request? They don't have any jurisdiction over what you believe. They can't deny your request for an opt-out because they think your beliefs are homophobic, any more than they can stop a sexist imam from making a menstruating girl pray at the back of a cafeteria. Don't Christians also have feelings? Ask them that, if they use feelings as an excuse. How is my child going to feel when forced to partake in these classes when they are required by their faith to abstain? Are some feelings more than other? Again, accuse them of discrimination. It freaks them out. They don't know what to do. So prepackaged excuse number 3 is this. We can't let your kids opt out because it would be an unreasonable burden. Well, some Muslims leave the class to pray twice, sometimes 3 times a day. If they can allow Muslims out of the class to pray that often, why can't they allow your kids to leave the class? Are they going to indoctrinate your kids more than 3 times a day? What about advance notice? What if they refuse to even tell you when they're going to teach this stuff? Well, if they do that, ask them the following question. Say to them, if my child was not good at long division, would you give me advance notice of when they were doing long division so that I can help prepare them at home or get them a tutor? They're going to answer, of course, yes. Then ask them why they can't give you advance notice when your children will be learning about transsexuality. When my lawyer asked them this in court, all you could hear was crickets. Remind them that keeping parents abreast of what is happening in the classroom is the standard of practice in the teaching profession. This is why many schools have daily agendas or calendars. And finally, advise them that failure to give a parent the information they need in terms of advance notice is a violation of both provincial policy and local school board policies. There are parent engagement policies that exist at the provincial and local level that require schools to give you the information you need. If they refuse to give you advance notice, tell them that they are violating their own sacred policies. So that's it. I don't think I've ever spoken so quickly in my life.
Steve managed to encapsulate the last 4 years of his life into 15 minutes. How many of us can do that? Incidentally, after the meeting, Steve will have a number of millstones available for those who like to purchase them. I'll pay for the court case. We can, for those who would be interested, we can also email a text form of Steve's presentation to all of you, so you can review that. For those who've taken notes, I should have told you that beforehand, but thank you. So now we have time for questions. 10 minutes for questions for Steve, if you have any, maybe about his presentation or about his experience dealing with the local school. Yes.
What happened in the end? Were you able to get your children out?
There's no end. This is still an ongoing situation. It's still before the courts. It's been evolving quite a bit lately, but I wish I could tell you what the conclusion was. Call me again in maybe 3 or 4 years. That was my question. Yes.
How were your children affected by this?
How are your children affected by this?
Not too bad, I think. You know, they have a very large awareness of the issues involved by virtue of the fact that I'm involved with this lawsuit. We try to shelter them as much as possible. You know, I think it's been harder for my wife to tell you the truth than it was for me. Because my wife works for the same school board that we're taking to court. So, but my kids, we're doing our best to kind of shelter them as much as possible. I think their teachers are all afraid of us. So I think, in fact, my lawyer told us, and maybe he wasn't completely right for saying this, but my lawyer told us that they'd be too afraid to teach our kids anything because the last thing they'd want to do is give us more evidence. You know, it didn't really work out that way, but for the most part, my kids are probably the safest kids in all of Ontario in terms of being exposed to this stuff.
That's actually an important point that we'll go back to later on in terms of being assertive with the schools and how that can help to protect your kids. Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, Steve, maybe if you can elaborate on that last point. So your kids now are going to school, and are they given the option to go to the library or do something different?
Oh no, they're not accommodating my family at all. Oh no, maybe they would never actually follow the law, but the fact of the matter is they would, with one exception, I think they're too nervous to teach my kid anything because I have arguably the best constituting. And if they know that if they were to ever do that, that he'd be all over the situation. It would just be bad for them if they were to do it.
Steve, thanks for your talk. I really appreciate it. Does the provincial government ever speak about your particular case? Have they ever gone on record to speak about your case at all?
When Broughton was the education minister, who was the education minister at the time, she basically said that it's up to the local. She lied, basically. What they said, I don't mind saying this, that she's a liar, but what they said at the time was that it's up to the local school boards, that the provincial government has nothing to do with it. But I know for a fact the provincial government is involved with my case. So basically, she's lied to everybody about them being hands-off when it comes to my case.
But that's just as illogical as everything else you're saying, because the province sets the curriculum, do they not?
Yes, they do.
But yet they have nothing to do with it?
Okay. You're right. Yeah, you're going to confuse yourself by trying to make sense of it because it doesn't make sense.
Yes. You know what, just quickly, a question of onus. When they bring forth these arguments, when you suggest to opt out, or if anybody here decides to go through the school system, decide to request an opt out, and they provide these excuses, the onus of proving these things that they state, does that fall within the jurisdiction of the school board, or
the onus is on them to legally. They have a legal duty to accommodate you. They have to, for them to say no, we're not going to accommodate you. They have to prove that it was either too expensive to accommodate you, or there was a health and safety issue for not accommodating you. Like if your kids are opting out, where are they? Who's supervising? This is not new law. There's nothing novel about my request. The Muslims and Jehovah's Witnesses actually cleared the path for religious accommodation. So, like the burden of proof is on them, and they'll never be able to prove that's an unreasonable burden. Which is why they resort to nonsensical excuses like it's against our policies. Which is like the dumbest thing they could possibly say is that we can't let your kid opt out because it's against our policy.
Now, opting out means they're responsible for them within the school environment.
Yeah, they can sit outside the classroom, they can go to the library, or kids leave the classroom all the time. The kids who are, without getting into the terminology, who are identified, go to the learning resource room all the time. Like, classrooms nowadays are not like when in the 70s when I was a kid. The door is always opening and closing. Kids are always leaving that classroom.
Other questions? Yes.
My questions are in fact what the GSA is.
Can you clarify what the GSA is?
A GSA is a gay straight alliance, a so-called gay straight alliance. And what that is basically gay clubs in schools. So there was an assembly at my wife's school, for example, where a Jewish person, a Jewish lesbian, a married Jewish lesbian, came in and she taught the kids, she told the kids that what the Old Testament says about homosexuality is obsolete and archaic. So this is not, I'm not using the word indoctrination loosely. This is happening in the schools.
The second part of the question, how long does it usually take with these back and forth school work? First response, second response, how much in advance do you have to submit?
Unto ages of ages.
So
how long does this take?
You mean what I'm going through right now?
No, I don't know how long that's taking, but
well, okay, I submitted my reply, right? Okay, I submitted my request in September. I got a phone call right away saying no within a week, without even meeting with me, which is very bad for them because they didn't even meet with me. They just said no right off the bat. I asked for a meeting. I got a meeting 2 months later. They said a bunch of awful things to me 2 months after I submitted my request. I sent them a letter asking them to confirm the awful things that they said. They refused to confirm the awful things they said, but I happened to have it on tape anyways. And then their next letter was, basically 2 months after that. And then basically I just kind of didn't say anything to them for a while, but it depends on your school board. They didn't want to deal with me, right? So it was just like, when I told them I wanted to meet with them, they say, okay, our schedule's free in a month. You know, but it depends on your school board.
Yes, George. Is there some school boards that are better to deal with than others, be it either Catholic or public or even regional, like say Halton, Hamilton?
Well, it's interesting because part of the evidence I've submitted before the courts is letters from parents in other school boards. So I found, we've actually, and this is very helpful for our case, we have found families in Hamilton who signed affidavits who said, why are you guys doing this to Tourloukis? We've submitted the exact same forms that he did, and they've been accommodating our family for years. So there are hundreds of Muslim families in Mississauga that's submitted a very similar form to me that I did, and they're being accommodated. And the leader of the Muslim community in Mississauga even wrote a letter to the court saying, what are you doing to this guy? We submitted the exact same form, and then we got accommodated by our school board. So, you know, it depends on the school board a little bit. I think, unfortunately, Hamilton is on the kind of on the cutting edge in terms of discriminating against Christians. So I just, you know, maybe it was my bad luck, but there are parents who are getting accommodated. It's just, and sometimes it happens secretly. So you go to a principal, because there's lots of principals who think like you do. There's lots of principals who say, you know what, don't worry about it. You know, but so that's why go to your teacher, go to your principal first. But some school boards are willing to accommodate, absolutely.
And time for just 2 more questions. Yes, Jeff.
Oh, sorry. Very quickly, I was just going to say, as a point of information, most of us have cell phones that can record voice memos and stuff like that. You are legally allowed to record any conversation secretly that you are a part of. You can't record other people's conversations, but as a way of of just, making sure, even if they're not gonna document it in writing.
I'm glad you said that because it was a part of my original speech, and my wife crossed it out. I was told that I wasn't allowed to say that. But so we had this 2.5-hour conversation where they said absolutely horrible, awful things to me, bigoted things to me, and their lawyer did not even challenge the legality of the recordings. Now there's actually, I very quickly said I don't want anybody to get in trouble with the law, but there's right ways to record and there's wrong ways to record. There are some things you can record a conversation without the other person's consent, but there are some finer things that you should know about before you do it, and that's all I'm going to say about that. Okay, Tina?
If you had to do this again, what would you do? I mean, how would you could go back? What would you do differently, or?
What would I?
Yeah, I mean.
Nothing really. Like how would you feel if they told you it was none of your business what your kids are learning in school?
No, I know.
I didn't have a lot of options. At the time I was having some problems with my health. We needed my wife's income. Like I couldn't say to my wife, okay, you're going to homeschool because we needed my wife's income. I didn't want a Catholic education for my kids. I respect the Catholic system, don't get me wrong, but public schools are supposed to be for everybody. Me too. We find ourselves in a situation because they've been getting away with it for too long, basically.
There were a couple other hands, and I don't want to cut it off, but they're really pressing some.
Okay, just one very quick question. Okay, I read an article that in Mississauga, parents pulled their kids out of the sex ed curriculum, and the teacher turned around and started teaching bits of it in math class and science class. Can you comment on this, or have you experienced this?
I haven't experienced this. Because of time constraints, I had to limit what I had to say. But ladies and gentlemen, you have to realize that this is so much bigger than sex education. My legal case, actually, believe it or not, has very little to do with sex education. It involves sex education. But Father Geoffrey, 5 years ago, it's all his fault, really, why I'm in court with that. 5 years ago, he wrote a letter as the secretary of the Orthodox Association. You might remember this, you might not remember it. Basically, to the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board. In this letter, what it said was this, that you have a definition of homophobia that includes our sincerely held religious beliefs. And then you're required to eliminate and challenge homophobia. Well, if you're required to eliminate and challenge homophobia, and the way they defined homophobia included people's beliefs, then does that mean you're going to try to reprogram our kids? I'm paraphrasing, of course, forgive me, Father Geoffrey. So, like I said, this is just so much bigger than just sex education. So be aware of that.
Any other questions before we stop? All right. Steve has provided a real example of courage to us. But I would suggest to you that Steve is not just someone who likes to make waves. He's not an unusual parent. He's a busy small businessman, a professional. His wife's a teacher. They have all of the usual burdens of families anywhere. He's not someone who spends his time involved in all sorts of political issues. He's a parent who was faced with a situation just like all of us, and he chose to do something about it. And I have to say, his particular case and his endurance in this particular case has been a real inspiration. There's an inspirational, I would suggest a very a Christian inspirational movie called The Untouchables. Some of you may be familiar with it. And there's a scene in it in which Elliot Ness, a lawyer, is trying to get Al Capone in the city of Chicago. And an Irish policeman takes him somewhere where they can talk, where the walls don't have ears. And the Irish policeman says to him, "Do you want to win? Do you want to get Capone?" And he says, "Yes, I want to get Capone." And he says, "Here's what you have to do to get Capone. If he pulls a knife, you pull a gun." Okay? Now someone's going to quote that and say, Father Geoffrey say, "Pull a gun!" Right? Pull a gun! Right? That's not what I'm saying. We have to be wiser than those on the other side. We have to anticipate what they're going to do, and we have to respond with strength and assertiveness. And that's what Steve has done. Thank you so much, Steve, for coming. We'll turn next to Sam Sotiropoulos, our friend from Toronto. Sam has had an extraordinary opportunity over the last couple of years, which is only given to a few people, Sam was the lone Orthodox Christian. I don't know if he's a lone Christian, but a lone Orthodox Christian on the Toronto District School Board, which is really just like living in a lion's den for a few years. Sam was elected in a by-election, if I remember correctly, and in the time when she was on the board, he fought strenuously on this issue, on the issue of the inappropriateness of students going to the Pride Parade because there's nudity at the parade. And I've read about all of this. That was him. Okay. And a number of other issues where he sometimes stood alone or with a few other trustees. And I think to his credit, he made such a splash that the opponents, those who are on the other side, made a special effort to get him out of that position. And I remember speaking with Sam at the time of the election and saying, maybe this was your deliverance from that. You have had the impact you had to have, and now you don't have to endure it anymore. With that, though, Sam brings a tremendous amount of experience with the public education system in Canada's biggest city. He's dealt with the good, the bad, and the ugly, and right now he's very, very much involved in the organization around the sex ed issue in the city of Toronto. So I'd like to turn it over to Sam to speak to us.
Thank you, Father Geoffrey, and welcome to everyone who's come here tonight to learn a little bit about things that you may have some knowledge of, and things that you have no knowledge of, which is most things that go on in the education system today in Ontario, unfortunately. I'm going to say I'm very proud, first and foremost, of people like Steve, and especially Steve, because he's the only one that I'm aware of, who've taken on the elephant in the room, proverbially speaking, and have asserted their parental rights in education, because you do have those rights. Contrary to what may be popular opinion, you have rights. Not only do you have human rights, you have rights as a parent. These rights are enshrined in law, and it's up to all of you to do exactly what you're doing here today, which is to inform yourselves, to inform your friends and family, and to make sure that you assert those rights. Father Geoffrey and Steve are both correct. You need to actually stand up. We all need to stand up. Now, what is it about this sex education curriculum that we object to? I'm just going to go over a brief summary of what is objectionable, not any specifics, but just generally speaking. It's a sexualization of children. We're talking about matters. Why does a 6-year-old boy need to know what a vulva is? Really? I mean, they still believe in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and all the rest of those, innocent child things. What do they need to know what a vagina is? Do they really need to know these names? For what purpose? To what end? And always keep in mind that the one question that should be in the back of your minds, which is always in the back of my mind, it's a Latin phrase, cui bono, who benefits? So who benefits from a child knowing the proper names of anatomical sexual organs at age 6? I don't think the child benefits from that in any way, shape, or form. In fact, what it does is it opens up avenues for the child to explore, as children are curious by nature. We all are, especially when we're children, and we're fresh slates, we're learning, we're going to explore these things. And you try going to Google and typing up vulva or vagina and see what's going to come back on that search engine. So is this protecting children, or is this actually sexualizing them? I would submit to you that it's a sexualization of children, clearly, and at an age inappropriate to such topics when they're not ready for these things. So this is a pollution of a child's mind. Make no mistake about it. Secondly, although the province talks about how they consulted with parents, there was no consultation. During the point in time when I was a trustee, from February of 2012 to October 31st, 2014, no trustees were consulted as representatives of our communities. We had no idea that the province was going to come back with the sex education curriculum until after the municipal election, in which I was defeated, not as soundly as I think they hoped I would have been defeated. But the truth is, they, I think, purposely waited until after the election because I had created so many waves. What had I done? Well, from the moment that I arrived at the school board, I had pointed out an issue with a website link that the Toronto District School Board had on their official website, which took children and anyone else who happened to visit that page as a resource to a website which promoted children experimenting with vegetables in a sexual manner. So essentially telling kids to, stuff their orifices with vegetables, frozen and not. Carrots, cucumbers. I mean, and not only that, but there were some other pretty explicit suggestions and by way of sexual exploration and I mean things. We're talking about matters that as an adult and being a man of many and varied experiences, I had no inkling of. So certainly, I mean these sorts of things were completely beyond the pale. And so when I went forward with this to my colleagues, none of them supported me on having this withdrawn. So 21 colleagues, not one of them wanted to sort of back me on this. So I took it directly to the director at the time, Chris Spence, who subsequently was ousted and had to resign as a plagiarist. I'm sure we all remember that. Fine example for students throughout the province, the country, and the entire Western world. The director of education at Canada's largest school board, the fourth largest in North America, was a plagiarist, plagiarized his way through his educational career. That aside, I went to the man and I said to him, look, this is inappropriate. We can't have this link on this website. We need to take it down. Well, I'll look into it. Looking into it got me a telephone call from the Gender-Based Violence Prevention Office at the TDSB. The TDSB does not even have a violence prevention office, but it has a gender-based violence prevention office. It leaves me scratching my head a little bit, and I think should leave all of you with a little bit of a question mark. I'm told as well by senior administration that the entire office of 10 people is staffed by sexual aberrants and homosexuals, which I guess stands to reason considering its focus primarily, but also begs the question around equity, which is what they seem to always be pushing. How is that equitable if everybody employed in this department is of a particular sexual orientation or persuasion? It seems to fly in the face of everything that the Toronto District School Board talks about around equity. But that being said, so I got a phone call from this gentleman who's the head of the department, the Gender-Based Violence Prevention Office, and we got into a rather heated conversation, at which time he was trying to basically validate this link and tell me that it was okay for the Toronto District School Board to provide this sort of information. I told him that in no uncertain terms, his nomenclature wasn't going to work with me. He could use whatever edubabble he wanted. It really washed over me. I'm a student of etymology and philology. None of this stuff makes any sense. Quite honestly, if you look at the definition of their terms, they're jargon and it's just bogus terminology that makes really very little to no sense at all, except when used as a political tool. And I explained to him that I wasn't going to buy any of this and I wanted the link taken down. So our conversation ended on rather heated terms, but nonetheless, I pursued the matter. I went to the director again and rather forcefully explained to him that I was prepared to sort of really explode the matter and that I wanted the link taken down. Finally, a newspaper article came out after my repeated attempts at getting the news out by sending out press releases, and the link soon enough was taken down from the Toronto District School Board website. But here's what they did. And this is why it's kind of a bit of a no-win situation. It's sort of like Hercules cutting off the head, one head of the snake's heads on the Hydra. Two more come out in their place. So what they did was, they took down the link, but then they hid all of these resources behind the firewall. So they're not publicly available, i.e. you as parents can't access these resources, but your students, your children in the schools who are behind the firewall on school connections, of course, have access to these materials. So, it's kind of it's the shell game where you move the ball around. Where's the ball now? But the ball's somewhere, just you don't know where it is. So then after that, realized that there was a lot more going on here and started getting calls from parents about some of the things that were going on in the schools, including the introduction of what are called positive spaces. Now, in order to understand what a positive space is, you have to understand what a GSA is, the Gay Straight Alliance, which are for high schools. Although now they've expanded into middle schools as well. My former middle school was the first GSA in all of Ontario in a middle school, which is kind of interesting. But that having been said, a positive space is the Toronto District School Board's interpretation Now, this is important, and Steve alluded to it, and I'm just going to state this quickly. The boards, it varies what presentations will take place and what interpretations will what policies will be formulated in each board. It's varied and different because the boards are essentially left free to interpret laws and curriculum. So Bill 13 was passed, the anti-bullying law. Well, the Toronto District School Board interpreted that law as requiring them to create a policy called the Positive Spaces program. The Positive Spaces program was essentially, the kernel of it was that every elementary school, K to 6, was to have a room or an area designated as a positive space. There was a teacher who was going to take on the leadership role in that positive space. And they were also supplied with a little bit of training. And there's some posters that go along with that training that should be put up in the positive space to identify the positive space. Anyway, to make a long story short, the whole positive space thing is a way to introduce things like the transgender idea in elementary schools before the curriculum that we're talking about and concerned about has even been brought into the schools. So right now, currently at the Toronto District School Board, it's mandated that every elementary school have a positive space. So they're already teaching things like transgenderism before the curriculum has even been brought into play. And it's totally age indiscriminate because at a K to 6 level, this stuff's being foisted on kindergarten students right on through to grade 6. And they're bringing in community partners to talk about this stuff around the notion that it is somehow making the school a safer place because everybody feels included. So as soon as I learned about this, of course, I became a little bit concerned and started to voice my concerns. Anyway, to fast forward a little bit, there was that issue, and it blew up in my own ward. I had an issue around one principal in particular who decided to make the whole school into a positive space, ordered 4 posters that were actually not even on the approved list from the Gender-Based Violence Prevention Office, or GBVP. They love their acronyms, by the way. So that blew up, and I had a small revolution. I had 70 parents come to a meeting one night, and it was not pretty. The principal basically, I lost complete respect for him, and the community itself sort of lost all respect in the man. Anyway, I ended up having him backpedal. I forced the issue, but point is, it just sort of snowballed from there, and I started actually seeing just how widespread and how emphasized this material was. And it's kind of strange because in my 3 years, essentially 3 years, 3 school years as a school board trustee, I never once had a parent come to me and ask me for more sex education. I had parents come and ask me for more math, more intensive reading, more remedial English, all sorts of things, science, but I never had parents come and ask me for more sex education for their children. Never once. So, this notion that, parental input was sought begs the question of, which parents were involved in this? Everyday, normal, heterosexual, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Sikh parents, or did they seek parental input from specific communities? Well, you bet it was the latter and not the former. And those specific communities were well defined. We know who they were. Finally, I guess, I stood up against the fact that the Toronto District School Board participated in the Pride Parade when there was, rampant nudity flouting the laws of the country. And that earned me, Canada-wide coverage as the homophobe at the Toronto District School Board. Oh, I've been called every name in the book. I've had threats. My house was supposed to be burnt down. I can tell you that the vitriol and the anger and the hatred that was directed towards me was at times, pretty intense, to put it mildly. Nonetheless, I told them during and now I continue to tell them that I will not be bullied. I will not back down. I will continue to push for what I know to be right, not what other people would have me believe. So I continued in the track along the notion that there was serious problems around the emphasis of these topics at the Toronto District School Board. Got to the point where, in February of 2014, this is important, the Ontario Human Rights Code was amended to include gender identity. there was no fanfare around this, no big announcements. It was done on the hush hush, so they could actually accommodate this curriculum. In February, this was done. I tweeted about it shortly thereafter, stating explicitly that I reserved the right not to believe in any of this stuff. It was sort of passed over at that time because I don't think they wanted, an emphasis on it in that period. When the election came around, I tweeted about it again. But I categorically refuse to believe, unless some scientific evidence is produced, I don't believe in transgenderism. Please produce the scientific evidence. I reserve the right. I didn't even actually outright refuse to believe it. I just said I reserve the right not to. Which is kind of, saying everything and nothing at the same time. Because you got to be careful. No, I mean, this is the whole lingo. You have to be careful when you're in a public position what you say, even though, we're individuals and we should have the latitude to be able to express a personal opinion. Put that aside. So at the end of the day, I can tell you that the cards are stacked against us. The unions are all in on this, even though their primary function is to deal with and to represent their membership on a collective bargaining basis. They've taken on the mantle and the role of social engineers. So they're totally in bed with the school board administrations, who are also largely populated by individuals who propose and, in fact, support these initiatives. And I will also say, finally, in summation, I guess the preeminent, concern that a lot of parents have around the sexualization is who was responsible for this new curriculum. And that was, of course, former Deputy Minister of Education, Ben Levin, who is, a self-admitted pedophile, convicted of child porn, and a specialist in the counseling, pardon me, thank you, in the counseling of the sexual abuse of children. That was his specialty. It turned out, as I had sat in the courtroom listening to the despicable crimes that this man had committed against his own daughters, I might add, 3 of them, which is, it's mind-boggling to me personally. And the argument, of course, that the government presents is that this man had nothing to do with the curriculum. Well, the fact of the matter is, it's a moot point whether or not he actually wrote any parts of the curriculum. You can't prove that, you can't disprove it at this point. However, he did choose who wrote the curriculum and who had input. That is without question, because that was his job. So let's, just dispel that whole myth that's been perpetrated or promoted by the government. That's a fallacy and a falsehood. So all that being said, at this point, in summary, my advice to parents, if you can't swing the homeschooling, which is what I would tell you right now is probably your best option, considering what's coming, the schools are already full of this stuff, and this curriculum will only just give them license. Although the material already exists, there's been more of an atmosphere where it's kind of optional. Now the curriculum makes it part of the fabric of the school day. Look out for terms like inclusive language. Inclusive language is the language that introduces this stuff in math class, because they'll be using examples around sexuality to get math concepts across to your children, which somehow, really doesn't make much sense to me. But that term is a buzz term you need to look out for. Inclusive language. Equity, that's another, famous rubric under which all this stuff is pushed. Social justice is the umbrella term under which all of this is termed. And then there are others as well, but my time now is over, so I'm not going to be able to continue in this vein. I don't write speeches down, I just sort of say them off the top of my head. But that, in summary, is a little bit of an insight into what's going on today in education. And the Toronto District School Board is, of course, the model for all other school boards. So basically, if it's not already happening in your school board, it's coming. And it will be just as bad, if not worse, in some ways, than what's going on at the Toronto District School Board. So I want to thank Father Geoffrey for organizing this symposium and allowing me to speak for him. Thank you.
you have a cell phone, you could kindly turn it off. Apparently, the cell phones are affecting the transmission signal to our friends in Toronto. And it doesn't work. We just yell louder. So if you turn them off, it would be much appreciated. We'll take 10 minutes now for questions for Sam. Yes.
Sam, thanks for your talk. I just have a question about procedural work of the trustee's role. I'm not going to go into the education act, but maybe you can tell us, guide us, what is the exact role of the trustee when it comes to their discharging of the responsibilities about what's being taught directly? Do they have an obligation to take on your case and advocate for you, or can they say, you know what, I don't want to hear from you anymore, and I don't need to speak to you? What is the legal requirement for a trustee on any issue, not just this, but on any issue, to their constituents?
Really, there is no legal requirement for a trustee to take on anything that you bring to their. They're actually what the great defense that trustees often use when parents come to them is that we're involved only with policy, not operations. That's an operational matter. You need to go through the channels of the teacher, the principal, and the superintendent, and then the other administration levels in order to deal with that, which is what happens more often than not. Trustee candidates and trustees generally would like to sort of avoid these types of confrontations, so they'll slough you off in that way. If you do find a trustee that is willing to sort of, take on that role, but probably since what happened to me, less and less of them around, I guess, then you'll find that they're going to be basically given the runaround if they do take it on. And so it'll probably likely end up going nowhere in the sense that many meaningful changes will occur. So to think that they have any sort of legal responsibility to you per se in the matters that you outline is wishful thinking at best. It's more a matter of, a trustee essentially is responsible for policy and the budget. Those are the two primary concerns of a trustee at any board. Anything beyond that is stuff work they're creating for themselves. So
policy is a very broad term. So that's why. Is it something in the Education Act? On the TDSB website, for example, in very, very brief terms, it'll say trustee's role is policy, budget, and a few other minor things. But it's basically on the website. There's nothing I'm finding anywhere in the act itself or anywhere else which tells me what their legal requirements are to cater to me as a constituent. I haven't been.
I think the answer is there are none.
There are none.
I would just say
nothing codified anyway.
Yes, thanks, Father. And the thing is, though, another thing that's very hard to get from trustee or superintendent is these policies, because in Toronto, I don't see them listed anywhere. There's no links for them.
They've hidden it all behind the firewall.
How do you? I'm asking you. How do you get that information? Freely. Like I don't know how you get it because I don't think it should be that difficult for me to see what these policies are. They have certain names, right?
Now the policies that you're referring to, operational policy, it depends on whether they are operational policies or whether they are just general policies. If they're operational policies, well, you see, you should have access to both, right? But there seems to be some kind of dichotomy that gets put in place around operational policies, which are not created by trustees. They're created by staff. And so they're sort of hushed up and they try to sort of make it as for internal use only type of, use, for lack of a better term. So you likely won't get any of those unless you've got someone on the inside who'll be able to run them through a photocopier.
So there's no reference, there's no depository of policies that should be made available to the public. There's nothing like that.
The general policies are all policies that are passed by the board are available in the minutes of board meetings. You'll find them there. So if you go back, if you know which policy specifically you want, you're not going to find them as a categorical layout, easy to find I guess, easy to access, parent-friendly format.
The TDSB, I know this from my own experience, has the worst website, I think, in all of Ontario. There are rural school boards with very few people in them who have more parent-friendly websites.
It's intentional.
Yeah.
It's intentional, without question. Yeah. It's there to stymie you.
Other questions? So you said that trustees are responsible for budget and policy.
Primarily, and as well as sitting on disciplinary committees. But that's it's a tertiary role.
Well, let's talk about budget then.
Yes.
How can they justify what seems to be a huge amount of resources and funds going towards a small minority group?
6%. 3%. Not even 3 to 4%.
So, and there's these spaces, there's these posters, there's this vegetable website, 10 people administering it, and there's probably a lot more than that too.
How do they justify
How do they
that?
justify it? You have a 3% population with a huge amount of money and resources being put towards it.
Yeah, well, they turn around and they use things like the bullying, the Bill 13, the bullying law.
Don't
and they
bullies take money from people?
Absolutely they do. Absolutely they do. But you see, this is how they justify it, that they want to make the schools safe, right? And so, safe in their interpretation means that they're going to focus on this particular avenue of approach.
I'd just like to add to that. The difference between folks who are doing this and us is that folks who are doing what Sam's describing are doing it full time and being paid by the taxpayer to do it. That's right. Or they're getting some grant from some organization. We're here for a few hours on a Sunday night. We're not making this our full-time commitment. We can wake up every morning, eat, sleep, and breathe this. They do. And there are hundreds and hundreds of people who are involved in the bureaucracy. This is their life. Mm-hmm. And this is why if we want to act in the defense of our kids, we have to be very committed, very assertive, and very determined to hang on and endure for the long haul, because this isn't going away. One of the things I'd like to draw to your attention, you'll find on your seats these envelopes for the Parental Rights and Education Defense Fund. This is the defense fund that's funding Steve's court case against the Hamilton District School Board. It's cost tens of thousands of dollars so far. One of the reasons it's taking so long is that the school board is stretching it out, because Steve can't just sell his house and take the school board to court. The school board has essentially an infinite amount of money to fight it. That's the difference between our side, the side of the parents, members of the community, and the bureaucracy. So I encourage you, by the way, to make a donation to this initiative to help this. You can write a check made out to the defense fund, give it to Steve, or you can give him cash. He's pretty trustworthy. I encourage you to do that. But that is what we're up against. And then when our speakers say that this is one of the reasons homeschooling is very desirable, we're going up against a complex bureaucracy that is designed to shut us down. It is designed that way. So don't feel discouraged if you feel stopping. It's set up to stop you.
If I could just add one thing very, very quickly. Is you said why is it they're giving so much money? And it's really a use of propaganda to silence people. So when they have a positive space, they use things like safe and inclusive. They wrap it around in language, false language, misleading terms of safety and exclusiveness, so that if you protest it, they say, what, you're against safety? You're against inclusiveness? So they create these false arguments that you can't ever win with them, because they're all premised on lies. And in terms of the fight that we have before us, ladies and gentlemen, I asked a very experienced constitutional lawyer. I said to him, because he's been fighting these cases for years, I said, do the gays ever have trouble raising money to pay their lawyers? And he turned to me and goes, Steve, no, because the gays win cases, high-profile cases, all the time. They almost never lose. I said, do the gays ever have trouble paying their lawyers? And he said to me, Steve, never. I go, why? And he goes, because they feel persecuted, that's why. And until we start to realize that a school that considers themselves co-parents, a school that tells you it's none of your business to know what your kid is learning, until we start to realize that this is, albeit a soft form of persecution, I don't think we'll ever be fully mobilized to the extent that we need to fight this nonsense.
Thank you. That's all the time we have for questions, and you will have an opportunity during the roundtables to speak with both our speakers. I'd like to thank Steve and Sam for making the trip and we'll. Next on the agenda, I'd like to introduce to you the three-step action plan for September 2015. And we'll be giving out copies of this pamphlet from our sister organization, the Canadian Council for Religious Freedom. This is a new pamphlet. This will be available on the website of the council in the weeks ahead. There'll also be an online ad that will be circulated come September, because during July and August, people will sleep through this issue. They won't really care about it until just for Labor Day weekend, and then there'll be a panic. And that'll be the time that people will be looking for resources. It's important to remember that many of us either are first or second generation immigrants to this country. Many of us don't have 7 generations of ancestry in this country. And unfortunately, we do tend to feel afflicted, maybe psychologically, with being second-class citizens in the foreign land. Like we have to behave ourselves, and we don't want to offend anyone, we don't want to stand out from the group, and we certainly want to get along with the systems that exist so our kids can be successful, they can graduate, get a good job, and meet our dreams for what it means to live a successful life in North America. I'm very proud of the fact that I'm an 8th generation Canadian. My ancestors are United Empire Loyalists. And it takes some time to decide that this country is your home and that you are entitled to participate in the system here. That people will not be spying on you, that people will not be arresting you for participating yet. But we have an opportunity now to take advantage of the freedoms of living in a democratic society where, at least on paper, our rights and freedoms are still guaranteed. We need to use that opportunity, my friends. I would suggest that that opportunity will not always be with us in this country. Anyone who has friends or family, or maybe yourself, that come from Eastern Europe, have living memory of what it means to live under a totalitarian society. That society may be coming here. We don't know what the future holds. But right now, we have an opportunity to prevent that encroachment. And so this Parents' Guide to Education Choices is about doing that. It's about giving regular parents a path to asserting their rights, first of all, in a friendly and agreeable way. Since we're Canadians, we like to be friendly and agreeable. But secondly, if that doesn't work, in ways which are more assertive. So first of all, you'll find, if you open up to the central panel of the pamphlet, to advise your school is the first step. And as our previous speakers talked about, there are certain ways of doing this effectively. And one critical element of this, as Steve has said, is to underscore that your request for exclusion is based on your faith, and to demonstrate that. The request should be made in writing. You'll want to create a paper trail, so have a little file and pop a copy of everything you do in that file. And anything you receive from the school board, you'll want to retain a copy of that, and making sure you note on it the date that you receive it. Keep all of your emails. You might want to print out a copy of each one, because dealing with this can be very tedious, even if it's a simple request for your grade 2 student to not attend 1 or 2 classes on the new sex ed.
If I may, on that point, Father, if I can interject. It's school board unwritten policy that they will not respond to you in writing, which is why they always want to meet with you face to face. They will twist themselves into pretzels to not put anything in writing, which is why it's a good idea to buy one of those little recorders if you're going to be going into any meetings, and surreptitiously recording those conversations.
And that's part of step 2. We'll get there in a moment. That's actually an important part of this. To simplify this process, we have put together a legal document entitled the Parent Contract with the Public Schools. This will be available for download at the website of the Canadian Council for Religious Freedom. A version of it is available now on our parish website, And most of the organizations across Ontario that have been fighting on this issue for the last 4 to 5 years have been using essentially the same document. This was created by a lawyer in Toronto who was retained for this specific purpose, so that a legal document could be submitted to the schools, so the schools wouldn't have any excuse. An explicit delineation of what you want your kids taught and what you don't want your kids taught. So using this document can be very helpful because you just have to fill in your name, check off a few boxes, and send that in. It's easier than composing your own letter, although you can certainly use it to be the basis of a letter of your own if you want to. A copy of this document or any letter you send should be given to the classroom teacher and to the principal. And in many schools, that will be enough. They will be agreeable people and they'll try to help you. There are lots and lots of teachers across the province who do not like the sex ed and do not like the way direction things are going, and they'll be cooperative. But there are others who want to play very strictly by what they're being told, and still there are others who want to use this as an opportunity to push a particular agenda. So you never know, as Forrest Gump says, you never know what you're going to get. So you have to be aware of that and make sure you cover all your bases. Steve has outlined in great detail the kind of things you should include in your request, and Sam and Steve both have talked about the
non-responsiveness,
how to deal with non-responsiveness and how to deal with the circuitousness of some of the folks who might want to resist a reasonable request. The second panel talks about staff respect and cooperation. Do not let yourself be drawn into a theological or spiritual argument about whether you are a good person or what it means to be a good Christian. Refer them to me. I'm happy to talk for hours and hours.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that flippantly. I mean it. You need to refer them to a member of the clergy. Say, well, I'm not going to go into detail. This is what our faith teaches. Here are 3 points, and I need the exclusion. Don't let them drag you off the subject, because they will want to do that, and they'll talk about, well, I'm a Christian, and I believe this is a good thing, and I've read this new physical and health education curriculum, and I think it's great, and it meets mine. You're a Christian too. You'll love it. Have you read it? They'll take you off the subject. Don't let them do that. Stay on the subject. The subject is your request. You've made a reasonable request. Stay on the subject. And the clergy are there if they want to ask spiritual questions. There's Wikipedia. We have a bookstore upstairs in which we carry 500 books. Send them down. I'll give them a 10% discount if they hundreds of books on the Orthodox Christian faith. We'd love to have them. So don't get drawn in on that. You should also, as Steve pointed out, you should take the time to explain this to your kids to an age-appropriate level. They need to be shrewd enough to know what's going on, even if it's a little kid. So in a case, let's say you have a 4 or 5-year-old. How do you deal with this with a 4 or 5-year-old? There are some people in the school system who want to teach in the schools dirty things about things you do with your body, and we don't want you to learn that. Most of your teachers don't want you to learn that either, but there are some people who are forcing them to, and we want to help your teacher not have to do that. Okay? And in most cases, the teachers will be on board with that sort of thing. This shouldn't be an opportunity to disparage teachers, because most teachers are on board with you, and if you ask them politely and cooperatively, they'll help. Some will not, and again, we never know who those are. Students, however, have to be shrewd enough, and this won't start until maybe slightly higher grades. They have to be shrewd enough to participate in this process, and that participation involves recording any lesson that applies to this. It used to be, when I was teaching high school, it used to be that we would confiscate a kid's cell phone. Oh, those were the days. It was so nice, right? Because there'd be 2 kids in the class, they'd have cell phones, one would keep them hidden, another one would be foolish enough to get it out, and we'd confiscate it. That's never happened. Kids at all grade levels walk around with cell phones. So let's let them use them for something constructive, right? Whatever their electronic device is, teach them how to use a simple recording program, set it on their desk or set it beside their pencil case, and hit record. for the whole lesson. And you can tell your kids in advance the kind of things, the kind of words they should look for when they hear the word family, when they hear the word marriage, when they hear the word equity, inclusion, bullying, any of these words, hit record. Then make sure you have a regular conversation with your child and save those files, those sound files, on your hard drive. This is very important. Not just because we want to create an electronic paper trail with these things, but because in some cases there are staff, I'll say particularly in the city of Toronto, because it's such a big city and you kind of get everybody and their brother in that city. There are people who will want to use the sex ed curriculum to do things that are prohibited by the Canadian Criminal Code. One of the things prohibited in the Canadian Criminal Code is counseling a minor to do sexual things. So if you say to a minor that there are certain sexual things going on in the world, if you tell them what the Pride Parade is, if you tell them that certain sexual practices take place, and that's within the curriculum, that person's probably going to be safe doing that. However, if that person crosses the line in any way to endorse those practices or encourage those practices among students, they are counseling a minor to engage in sexual practices. That's against the law when you're an adult. If it's a 15-year-old telling a 14-year-old to do these things, the law protects them. If it's an adult in a position of authority, that contravenes the Canadian Criminal Code, and it also contravenes what's required of teachers as acting in what's called in law in loco parentis, in the absence of the parents, in a position of authority in the classroom. So when you have these recordings of what's going on in a classroom, you can listen to them. And if a teacher is crossing that line, and you have questions about whether or not they have in fact crossed that line, you need to submit those recordings to the police. Now you might say, that's a very unnice thing to do, Father Geoffrey. That's a very unnice thing to do. But this is where we're at, my friends. This is where we're at. So if people are vigilant, we're not all going to have to do that. Most of us will never have to do that. But if everyone's vigilant about that sort of thing, it will only take 1 or 2 cases in the whole province of Ontario to get out through the grapevine to local schools, and any teacher who wants to use this as a springboard for a personal agenda will be paralyzed, because they will know that in somebody's pencil case there might be a cell phone that's on, and the words are going to be recorded. And teachers who are shrewd obviously watch what they talk about. There's a high level of sensitivity. Anything can be a controversy in the classroom now. So people watch their words. We need to spread this idea also. We need to spread this idea because it will create a sensitivity in every school. You do not need to know where the cell phones are or which classroom they're in. The symbol, by the way, of the Canadian Council for Religious Freedom is the white rose. It's based on the organization in Nazi Germany called the White Rose that opposed the Nazis, because one of the reasons because they cracked down on religious freedoms. The Nazis were convinced that there were hundreds and hundreds of people involved in the White Rose movement. There were 10. There were 10. But they didn't know where they were. They seemed to be everywhere. And that's exactly the kind of environment we need to create in the schools, that eyes and ears are open, and if you're behaving yourself as a teacher, we're there with you. Because 90% of teachers are on our side. Okay?
Well, I don't know.
Well, maybe not. Depends where you live. Depends where you live. Depends where you live. Many teachers are on our side, but there are also a significant number who are not, who want to use this. So that's the way in which we can address the electronic record. Parents should also be polite and respectful towards staff in the schools, because if you're not, you're going to alienate them and you're not going to be able to make successful steps. On the last panel, you'll see appeals to get help. If a teacher has counseled students in a classroom to do something that's against the criminal code, and a charge is pending or an investigation is underway about that incident, that same incident should be submitted to the Ontario College of Teachers. That's why the Ontario College of Teachers exists. The accreditation of teachers is not to know that I have math level 2 or math level 3 primarily, because teachers can be thrown into lots of things that they aren't qualified to teach. It happens all the time, especially in high schools. The main purpose of the Ontario College of Teachers is policing the teaching profession to ensure the professional conduct of teachers. So if it's their friends, and we're paying a lot of money for it, as are the teachers who are paying their annual membership fees, I'm one of them that still pay my membership fee every year, let's use this organization to help weed out those who undermine the credibility of the profession. So if there is an incident in a school, you have an audio recording of it, you have maybe some written material, you've written a letter outlining the situation, simply send it along to the Ontario College of Teachers and ask them to investigate it. Can you imagine, just imagine if you will, out of all of the province of Ontario, what have we got, 10 million people, something like this, right? All of them, 11 million people. The whole province of Ontario, imagine if only 20 parents do this, just 20 parents. And imagine if only one case is found to be a teacher that's counseling students to do things which are against the criminal code. Now, there's at least one. I'm sure there are, what, 2? At least 2. You know, there are a few. But imagine there's one, and that teacher is charged on minor charges and loses their Ontario teaching certificate. They will never be able to teach in the province of Ontario again.
May I interject here for a moment? Forgive me, Father Geoffrey, I just want to make this statement here. If you go to the OCT website, the Ontario College of Teachers website, you have a list of the disciplinary actions that have taken place since forever. Do a random sampling. Take 10 and look at them. 7 out of those 10 will be sexual in nature, which is, it's mind-blowing. I will tell you that I've gone through hundreds of them. I'm doing research because I'm writing a book, and I can tell you that the predominant cases that go before the OCT are sexual related when it comes to teachers misbehaving. This is a fact. Second, I just want to make mention here, the OCT is not your friend. Despite everything Father Geoffrey just said, last year, the head of the OCT was himself, he was forced to resign because he actually wrote a book which was about inappropriate teen sex. He's a child pornography peddler, essentially. The head of the Ontario College Teachers Association was basically pushed out of his position because of his extracurricular activities in that regard. So, although it's there, they're not on your side either, unfortunately. Their job is really to cover it all up. And they've been doing that for years.
So we have this available to us, and sometimes going through the process is enough. The fact that any teacher who considers saying these things in the classroom has to think maybe they'll drag me before a hearing at the Ontario College of Teachers. That can be enough. I see some teachers in the room who are nodding their heads. Yes, so that is enough. And keep in mind, we're not going after most teachers, because most teachers will not use this as a springboard to teach the most explicit stuff, but there are those who will. So that's what I have to say about that. Do we have any questions about this? I'm happy to answer. Yes.
Quick question, and this is actually for Sam. He was mentioning about the OC, how do you say, Ontario College? Yeah, and he was mentioning about the disciplinary. Okay, how long were you a school trustee for? Just
3 school years, so 2 3/4 regularly.
Okay, so within those 3 years, have you noticed an increase in disciplinary or allegations of a sexual nature against teachers committed, alleged against?
Let me say this, it was not uncommon. Monthly, we had complaints coming in. It was not an uncommon occurrence. And we dismissed teachers on those grounds. I can't get into details because those are privacy, personal matters, but it was not uncommon. It actually, I will even go so far as to say, on a yearly basis, we dismissed 6 or 7 of them a year, easy.
And how are these? How are they? My question is, how are they being disciplined? Meaning, how How reliable is this?
Oh, and it ranges from stay at home with pay to maybe not pay, but generally speaking, none of them, at least, let me rephrase that. Many of them, most of them, do not actually lose their teaching license at the end of the day. So whatever, punishment may be, I guess, prescribed, they still, at the end of it all, do not lose the means to their livelihood, which is their teaching certificate, which is troubling at best.
Were there complaints that were not followed through, like swept under the rug, so to speak?
Not to my knowledge, but I'm not going to. I'm sure there are things that go on that are not reported. Yes, I mean I had something that was brought to my attention by a student, and then by a principal, but it was never reported. And when these things aren't reported, no actions can be taken.
Thank you. Yeah.
Father, I'm a little bit stuck on the criminal code aspect of things because I understand, there needs to be some, I guess, foundational work, for example, recordings or whatever. I think what I'm stuck on is that I think as civilians we would probably sense what is criminal activity kind of just from our own instincts. But sometimes I'm not sure if this brochure is saying, some of the more subtle things are criminal activity because, we all kind of, I think, know what a crime is just from our own intuition or our understanding. But is the suggestion here that you're sending people to the police because it's no small matter because of where's the boundaries there? Because,
This is a one-page brochure.
Yeah.
And it can't cover any of that. So people will have to do their homework and also you have to talk to your kids about it. So the nature of this sort of thing isn't comprehensive enough to go with all that. And I'm a lawyer, so I can't go with all that.
Yeah, I think it's just the suggestion of going to the police is kind of maybe a down the road kind of thing. It's because we're talking about the curriculum as it stands, and maybe some teachers taking liberties, but also we also have to be careful because this is where the issue is for me is that we need to know what they are teaching, right? And I wouldn't even want to resort to recording. I just really want to know what they're going to teach.
Yes.
And I think by rights I should know.
And I think most parents in Canada are in the same boat. And if I can say something a little strong here, that's why we're in this position. Because most Canadians keep their heads down low. And so I would be encouraging you to raise your head up and ask God for the courage to do more than your comfort level. Go beyond your comfort level. Because if we stay in our comfort level, they will, as a New York Times article last week suggested, be coming to our homes and churches and telling us what we can and cannot tell our kids in terms of our faith. It's a big American philanthropist that wants to start a campaign to shut down parents and churches who teach essentially what many of us share. So I would encourage you to be more courageous than you have been, to go beyond your comfort level. Not all of you are going to do that. Not all of you are going to be able to do that. And I would suggest that the majority, I'll speak about our Orthodox Christian community, the majority of Orthodox Christians don't do that. I'd say we're going to keep our heads down. But I would suggest, for the sake of our children, we need to do more than that. And there are a lot of people in Toronto, and it always encourages me when Sam's been a lot of this organizing in Toronto, when you get 5,000 people out in front of Queen's Park. And Steve said to me, I went there were so many people, I thought couldn't even find a place on the sidewalk. That's encouraging. That means people are going outside of their comfort zone because they realize the stakes are very, very high.
First of all, I want to thank you guys. I think the first thing I think we need, and everybody needs, is what you guys have, which is a lot of courage to speak up. And I commend all of you guys for the courage that you have, because it comes with a cost. And whether it's in Sam's case, labeling, or in Mr. Tourloukis' case, in everyone's case, that does come with a cost. Even going to a PTA meeting and after the fact being labeled as a homophobe simply because I raised some issues like this, I'm aware of that. One of the issues I have with the parents at our school, we talk about this, and I haven't met one parent that agrees with the curriculum. But to take that and sort of act on it, have the courage to act on it, is where I think people have to. Do we have a spiritual obligation to do so? I believe we do. Based on there's 50 people in the room. There's 11 million people in Ontario. How can we take this and organize this fight in such a way? Because you guys are telling us what I'm hearing, and Sam, the system stinks. I mean, the suggestions you've made are fantastic. How can we, I guess, fight the system? How can we get organized in such a way?
I would say that there are two prongs. We've talked about, the three of us and a few others have talked about this a great deal over the last couple of years. What is the approach to take? And I don't know about our other brothers here, but I would suggest that all of these approaches need to be used. In the Second World War, the Allies were attacking from the west. The Soviets were attacking from the east. There's a reason the Nazis lost. They were fighting on two fronts. It's the basis of the history of the Second World War. Right now, the province and the school boards are fighting on about 6 fronts. You know, there's the peace organization who's trying to get local school boards to adopt more parent-friendly versions of the sex ed curriculum. There are local meetings that are being organized in Toronto, which are making government MPPs wet their pants because they see their multicultural vote going out the window, right? And that's good. There are huge demonstrations at Queen's Park. How can you find that many homophobes on a Tuesday morning? I don't know, right? They all have to take the day off work for their kids, right? And that's having worked for the government, I can tell you that's scary to MPPs, right? There are parents going to the schools making their requests. There's a court case against one of the largest school boards in Ontario. There are us pesky people that are like gadflies. They keep bringing these things up and raising these questions. And one serious problem they have, people who are upset about this aren't all white evangelicals. That rocks their world because they're used to dealing with this stereotype of traditionally minded people being white, Anglo-Saxon, evangelical Protestants. And we aren't anymore. That's not what this kind of movement looks like. So I would suggest it's a multi-pronged approach. Whatever approach that you're taking within that is what you can do, right? God gives everybody different gifts. And, you know, maybe your gift is to speak publicly about this. Maybe you're good with words and you can speak to the media. I saw a number of groups who spoke with the Premier a couple weeks ago. Each of those groups, very different groups, each of them had a very articulate person to speak on their behalf. They didn't look like they were crazy. And that drives the Toronto Star crazy because you have articulate people. You're not supposed to be articulate. You're supposed to be the backward bumpkins from, you know, some other country. And what do you know? These people are articulate and they're faithful. And this is one way we can do it. Maybe you can just fight on the home front. Maybe you can fight within your school for the exclusion of your child and help other parents. Maybe you can take someone to court. Maybe your child can record something and you turn it over to the police and let the police run with it. Maybe you don't have the gumption to carry that all the way through, but you can do a little bit of something. So I would suggest that the nice thing about what's going on is that there is this, you could say, like almost a spiritual war effort that is broad, very broad-based. But part of that, and that's, we're going to have a break now. After the break, part of that is homeschooling. And as a homeschooler, I can tell you I served as a school trustee for a decade, and I taught in the Catholic school system, and I'm a homeschooler. So I can tell you what choice I've made. And there are some others in this room who've made the same choice. And we didn't just make it because it seemed nice or easy or we liked hanging around with each other. Some of us do like hanging around with each other, but that's not the main reason we did it. Right? So Ed, just a comment to finish up, and then we'll take a break.
So I guess my position would be yes to all of the above. However, in my estimation, the most effective route is the weakest link. You always look for the weak chink in any armor. And in this particular situation, the weak chink in this armor are the politicians. Make no mistake about it, they're cowards. The pressure needs to be put on the politicians, on the members of provincial parliament in particular. Trustees really, what a trustee can do, and it's actually happening in Halton, I'm surprised, there's a trustee who stood up there and he's trying to push their board to delay implementation of this curriculum, which they can do, actually. They can do that. If the board passes that, which is going to be another matter altogether. I don't see it happening, but anything can happen, I suppose. But the key here is that anything done politically can be undone politically. You're not going to get through to the bureaucrats. Ben Levin was a bureaucrat. He spent 35 years in education to get to that position, and there's no way that man was ever going to lose his job if he wasn't caught doing what he was doing. You can't get to those people. They're untouchables. The politicians, on the other hand, wherever you see them, at the supermarket, go up to them and be public and loud about it, as loud as you can. If you go to a dinner, your drama association or whatever is having a dinner, and they invited a politician to come down and speak. It's a provincial member of parliament. While they're being introduced and getting up to speak, have the courage, stand up and ask them where they stand on sex ed in public. The more people accost them in public, never mind how people are going to look at you, because you're going to get people, oh, what are you doing? You're going to get that, right? But if you don't do that, if you don't apply the pressure on these people, they'll never change any of this stuff. And that's where the weak link is. The cowardice of these politicians, because they are cowards. The moment you stand up to them and you do it publicly, you will see there are other people who support you in that. That's where you do it. You try to get them in as public a position as possible, and you try to get them to stand up for what's right. Sometimes, and this is Father Geoffrey saying, and I have to agree with it, sometimes you have to get the wrong people to do the right thing. And that's just the way it goes. But you can't do it unless you actually do it. And this is half the battle. Aristotle?
I think Sam has just given us an anti-bullying strategy. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to reconvene for the short discussion about homeschool. Please enjoy the donuts and coffee and beverages. We've already got coffee.
Are you reading?
Yes. I really thank you for asking that last question. You said, like, what can you do this?